Just a warning, this episode contains some graphic material that listeners may find confronting. A couple of years ago, when her Ponzi scheme was at its peak, Melissa Caddick had her eye on one of Sydney's most expensive homes. Right on the water at Rose Bay, the mansion had 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a pool, a gym, and an 8-car garage. The real estate agent who showed her through told me that when he informed her the asking price was $35 million, Melissa imperiously replied that she wouldn't pay more than $32 million.
$32 million? Oh, how frugal of her. Wow, very responsible. Look, so much about Melissa Caddick just never really quite made sense to her friends, and particularly on that front. They didn't understand how she got so rich. Many years before her Ponzi scheme, Melissa's real estate purchases and flashy cars, they were the subject of a lot of speculation among her inner circle. When she and her first husband bought their first house in the fashionable suburb of Paddington, a friend told us, and excuse my French here, but this is the direct quote, "I'm thinking to myself, fucking hell, this just doesn't add up." She was a salaried financial planner and her husband was basically a backpacking pom. How is this possible?
Another thing that stunned her friends was Melissa's petty thefts. One of them told me that they'd be at a restaurant and Melissa would remark on, "Oh, Tom, that's a beautiful butter knife," and before you knew it, she'd steal it.
Yeah, and that sort of marries up with another story from a dinner party that Melissa had one night at her Paddington house. A guest there commented on the unusual salt and pepper shakers she had. Melissa blithely confessed she'd nicked them from a restaurant she'd been dining at. So when her criminal enterprise was uncovered all these years later, some friends and former colleagues, look, yes, they were shocked by the scale of it, but in a lot of respects, they weren't surprised. Her old colleague, Hilton Wolfe, his ears certainly pricked when he heard Melissa's name on the news in 2020, accused then of masterminding a mega fraud.
It took some time for me to work out where I remember the name from, even though she lived within 2-3 kilometres from me, because I'd never seen her again.
And when the penny dropped, this was the woman that you'd worked with all those years ago. What did you think?
Not again. Not again.
Forensic psychiatrist Julian Parmigiani makes this interesting observation.
My experience is that most fraudsters, even the major ones that steal millions of dollars, generally start off with a tiny little fraud. They don't become Bernie Madoff overnight. They just build up to it over months, if not years, of successful little frauds or unpunished little frauds.
Welcome to episode 2 of Liar Liar, Melissa Caddick and the Missing Millions. I'm Tom Steinfort, a reporter with 60 Minutes.
And I'm Kate McClymont, an investigative journalist at the Sydney Morning Herald. We're delving into one of the most extraordinary crimes of the century. Melissa Caddick, a seemingly successful Sydney businesswoman, turned out to be a sociopathic con artist who stole more than $23 million from clients, mainly family and friends, who thought their funds were being invested in shares.
Within hours of her home being raided by the corporate regulator, she disappeared.
Where is she? The millionaire is accused of stealing from friends to fund her lavish lifestyle.
She hasn't been in touch with her family. She hasn't been in touch with her friends.
This was a systematic and meticulous attempt to defraud investors.
4 or 5 million? About $10 million.
You name it, Christian Dior, Chanel.
She was living off our money.
She is a survivor and she would have had a plan.
Nothing would surprise any of us.
You know how much we love you. You just come home, everything's taken care of, you're not in trouble.
Hi, it's Melissa Caddick.
In this episode, we're going to delve into Melissa's formative years and shine a light on the early frauds she perpetrated, the ones that she got away with. And you've got to ask that question, were there telltale signs all along that should have been noticed to avoid this bigger scam in later years?
So let's start at the beginning. Melissa Louise Grimley was born on April 21st, 1971, the second of 2 children for her father Ted, who worked in reinsurance, and her mother Barbara, the driving force in the family. Barbara was the receptionist in a local physiotherapy practice. According to her relatives, Barb was one of those people who sent out the boastful Christmas letters talking up all the marvellous accomplishments that her family had achieved.
Melissa and her brother Adam, who's 4 years older than her, they grew up in Lugano, which is a pretty comfortable middle-class suburb, about 23 k's south of Sydney's CBD. The Grimley house in Woodland Avenue was surrounded by bushland, and the backyard ran all the way down through the bush to the Georges River. It was a quintessential idyllic suburban life where kids are fishing and swimming and families have paddle boats up and down the river.
Kate Horn, a neighbour and a close friend of Melissa's all through their school life, describes where they grew up.
I would say Lugano was leafy and sleepy and nice, comfortable, middle class. It was a lovely place to grow up.
Melissa's childhood home was just 3 doors down from Kate's.
Yes, when they bought it, it was quite run down, I believe. But I think Barb had a good eye for things and they did it up. So it was quite beautiful and nestled in the bushland, just overlooking the water.
Another family friend, Jodie Blanchfield, who for a short time dated Melissa's brother Adam, described the Grimleys fondly.
They were doing quite well for themselves, but they weren't flashy about it. Her parents were hardworking people that just did really well for themselves. They never flaunted it, just really, nice down-to-earth family.
But behind the happy facade, there were stresses in the Grimley family. In May 1975, the Commonwealth Bank bankrupted her grandparents, Ted Sr. and his wife Joan. Creditors of their failed engineering company voted to accept 25 cents in the dollar from the sale of the assets, plus money that was to come from a loan against her grandparents' home. Within less than a year, her grandmother Joan was dead. She was 67.
For her part, Melissa Caddick was a pretty average girl at Lugano Public School and then Peakhurst High. Most people we've spoken to say there was nothing about her really that stood out.
She wasn't flamboyant or over the top. She was just a regular kid. I think we all were. We lived on the insular peninsula around Lugano, Peakhurst and Oatley, so we all sort of knew each other and knew each other's families, and she's just a normal kid. Like, she wasn't out there, she wasn't a standout type of person. She's just a normal kid.
Her friend Kate agreed.
She was reasonably nondescript, really. There was nothing particularly outstanding about her as a teenager. She was pleasant enough. We were friends, obviously, but she wasn't excelling at anything in particular. She wasn't particularly outstandingly popular or any of those things, just flying under the radar. She was probably also would have liked to have been a little bit more popular.
So given her financial wizardry, I guess you'd kind of assume that Melissa was pretty good at maths.
Well, that's the funny thing, because no, she wasn't. In fact, according to her friends, she did what's been disparagingly referred to as veggie maths. I mean, really, the most basic of maths courses.
No, maths was certainly not her strong suit at school. No, she did maths in society, and I think, if I remember correctly, she struggled a little bit with that as well. So, yes, it wasn't the financial thing. I thought maybe that just was something that perhaps developed with maturity.
Her friends also mentioned that Melissa's ambition to be a ballerina was stymied by her body type, which was short and stocky. One thing they did note, though, was that Melissa was very conscious of fashion labels, even back then.
Okay, you've introduced me to the term tag hag, which apparently is people that are obsessed with designer labels. And I suppose once it comes to Melissa here, once a tag hag, always a tag hag.
Oh, I'm glad you've got some new words there, Tom. According to Kate Horn, Melissa always had that desire to be better than she was. Even from primary school, she aspired to be in the coolest group.
We've also been told that Melissa was always indulged and spoiled by her parents, especially her dad. Kate Horn says she was
Daddy's princess, and so she was certainly indulged more than other people that we went to school with. Look, we went to a state school. It was a fairly average area.
Unlike her older brother Adam, who studied science at the University of New South Wales, Melissa didn't get the requisite marks to go to university. So instead, she enrolled at Patrick's College in the city, which offered secretarial and business admin courses.
Now, Tom, I'm just looking at the college's website. which claims that its original aim was to help young women gain employment in Sydney's corporate world by training them to be personal assistants and legal secretaries.
It doesn't look like it's changed much because its present aims are to help graduates land their perfect job, equipping them with, and I love this bit, modern business etiquette and deportment, dress sense and overall professional prestige.
Professional prestige. I reckon this, Tom, was the number one thing she took away from her training at secretarial school. Dress to impress.
Another thing Melissa also seems to have taken to heart was the college's Latin motto, aut optimum, aut nihil, which means either the best or nothing. Now, one thing a number of her friends told us was how much Melissa detested being referred to as a secretary. Kate Horn told us that Melissa would get very, very cranky if you said, here's Melissa, she's a secretary. She thought it was beneath her.
Well, in her mind at least, Melissa deserved much grander titles than her actual job description. And her first job after secretarial college was in admin at NRMA's investment division.
Right from the very start, there were clear signs that Melissa wanted to appear more important than she actually was.
And coupled with that was a burning desire to get there, to get to the top by hook or by crook.
Now, we've uncovered something very interesting. It's one of Melissa's earliest CVs. We're going to pop it on our website if you want to check it out. And it is fascinating because it gives such an insight into the fact that she was lying about so many things from the very outset.
From the details on the CV, it looks like it was written around 2004 when she was still at Wise Financial, and there'll be more on her job there later. But on the CV, she calls herself the managing director, but I think at the time there might have only been half a dozen people working there.
Really pumping up her own tyres there at this early stage. I mean, there are signs that she doesn't mind gilding the lily.
Oh, you are far too kind. She was an out-and-out liar right from the get-go. For instance, I notice that there is not a single mention of secretarial school, but Melissa does claim that she received a diploma followed by a master's degree from the University of Technology in Sydney. And guess what? I checked with UTS, who said this: UTS has no record of completion of a graduate diploma in finance or Masters of Business in Finance, or indeed any qualification under the name of Melissa Caddick or Melissa Grimley.
I am shocked. Okay, so from the outset, not really gilding the lily. I mean, if we're talking about false credentials or fake degrees on your CV, that's then a criminal offence. That's fraud.
I know, Tom, it seems astonishing, as does the breakneck speed which she climbed the corporate ladder, according to her CV. I mean, this is also a complete pack of lies.
Yeah, well, let's have a look at this bit here. During her stint at NRMA Investment, when she's only in her early 20s at that point, Melissa's CV has her monitoring and managing daily cash flows for the entire NRMA group. The quote on the CV says, this totaled 17 entities with a combined annual turnover in excess of $250 billion.
$1 billion.
Talk about some big noting. Now, she also claimed that she had established the stock lending portfolio for all of NRMA Insurance as well.
A crucial date, Tom, on the CV is October 1996. So this is a month after leaving the NRMA. 25-year-old Melissa has landed a new job, and funnily enough, it wasn't managing billions of dollars in cash flows for a financial conglomerate.
Yes, on her CV this job appeared something totally grand. However, we've discovered that it was an administrative role running the Sydney office of a recently opened boutique investment house. She got the job via a friend she worked with at the NRMA.
Her new boss, a prominent funds manager who doesn't want to be identified, recalled his assistant Melissa Grimley, as she then was, as being organised, efficient and reliable. And although there were only two of them in the office, Melissa dressed immaculately. Her boss told me that Her manicured presentation seemed suited to a job she aspired to rather than the job she had.
Okay, so that's the positive memories. On the flip side of the coin, there's this period after Caddick has been there. She's been there about 8 months. Someone from the firm's head office in Perth called Caddick's boss with a query. There were discrepancies showing up between invoices and then subsequent payments. Now, he then went down to the National Australia Bank branch in Pitt Street in Sydney's CBD and asked the teller if they could locate a number of cheques which had been presented for payment.
When the teller reappeared with the cheques, her boss was stunned. Melissa had been forging his signature.
We flagged there were some early telltale signs. This is one of those big red flags. It's quite extraordinary. You know, we've gone from, talking up your CV a bit to get a job. This is white-collar crime.
Back in the office, her boss, armed with the forged cheques, confronted Melissa with the evidence. She declined to look at the cheques and she didn't try to talk her way out of it. In fact, she didn't offer a single reason as to why she had done this. Now, her former boss said Melissa knew she was done, and he said to her, "We can escalate it or you can leave immediately." So Melissa Caddick packed her personal belongings into her designer handbag and bolted.
Kate, you'll be surprised to know none of this got a mention on her next CV.
How funny that. And it's interesting that Melissa didn't apologise and she never tried to come up with an explanation.
And what about repaying the money?
No, she didn't even offer to repay the money. And her employers didn't pursue her for the stolen funds, which her boss recalled was several $1,000s. Look, they were just glad to see the back of her. And as her boss told me, it was a clean exit, no lawyers, no police, no nothing.
Yeah, no police is the bit that jumps out at me there, because this is really, looking back now, such a sliding doors moment. It was an early chance to teach Melissa a lesson, stop her in her tracks, and perhaps we could have avoided the financial bloodbath that was to come. Instead, though, no one went to the authorities, unfortunately. Then, following that, there were several other instances where people could have stopped this pattern of behaviour in its tracks, but in the end, they just kind of took that easy option.
The other interesting thing is it appears that not a single one of her friends or her family ever knew that she'd been fired for embezzling money from her employer. Now, a normal person, busted by their boss and marched out the front door, might have been sufficiently chastened by this, really a near miss, and it probably would have taken it as a warning. But for Melissa, it was only the beginning.
Yeah, I didn't think I'd end up quoting Paul Kelly in this podcast, but that song jumps out at me. From little things, big things grow. And unfortunately, that is exactly what's happened here.
Forensic psychiatrist Julian Parmigiani's comment that most fraudsters don't become Bernie Madoff overnight is really interesting when you look at Caddick in that light. She started off with little frauds which weren't stopped, and look at how that turned out. $23 million stolen and so many lives ruined. I asked Dr. Parmigiani if the course of events would have changed if Melissa Caddick had been prosecuted for that first forged cheques.
Absolutely, absolutely. She may have changed her ways at an early stage and possibly not reoffended again. And certainly would not have built up to millions and millions of dollars worth of fraud of monies being stolen. And that's why I think it's a real message to those people who catch someone out. They have to report it because they're not doing their next victim a favour.
Tom, I know that neither of us has any medical training, but from all the things we know about Melissa Caddick, it seems she was anything but normal.
Yeah, let's not beat around the bush here. I mean, she's got all the hallmarks of being a sociopathic narcissist, and people with that kind of antisocial personality disorder, they tend to have a heightened sense of their own self-importance, and they seem to think that life owes them something. Well, tick, that's Melissa Caddick. A narcissist. They'll lie and cheat to get a desired position in life. Tick again.
The fictitious CV, the forged cheques.
Yeah, exactly. And people like Melissa, they they typically feel no empathy, and they have no sense of remorse either for trampling over others and getting exactly what they want.
That lack of empathy reminds me of something her friend Kate Horn mentioned. She said that each morning Melissa would catch the train to work from Riverwood Station, which was in a less well-off suburb than where they lived in Lugano.
She said to me one day, "Do you know that there are homeless people that live at Riverwood?" And it was winter as well. And I said, "Yes, I believe there are. And isn't it awful? It must be terrible for them. You know, it's cold and to be homeless and your heart goes out." And she said, "No, that's not what I mean. I shouldn't be confronted with that on my way to work." But I remember at the time thinking, we're quite different. You see things a little bit differently to me. There's a lack of compassion.
One of her friends told me that when Melissa's cousin was diagnosed with breast cancer and that she had the hereditary cancer gene, Melissa went off to be tested. On finding out that she didn't have what's known as the BRCA gene, Melissa told her friend she knew that would be the case because bad things don't happen to good people. "And what about your cousin?" her astonished friend asked. "Don't know, don't care," replied Melissa.
Oof, that's not just a lack of empathy, that's a complete black hole of empathy.
I know, but apart from the lack of empathy, another attribute of this type of personality is that they insist on having the best of everything because they deserve it. In Melissa's case, it was the cars, the clothes, the jewellery, holidays.
Now, apparently some of these sociopathic tendencies begin to show in late teenage years or early adulthood, and we've turned up one major event in Melissa's life that really predates the embezzlement. Close friends sort of wonder, looking back now, whether this incident might have actually had a catastrophic effect on Melissa Caddick and propelled her into this life that was consumed by cheating and deceit.
In the mid-1990s, Melissa Caddick was left emotionally and financially devastated after, of all things, a romance scam. She was still living at home in Lugano when she began dating a man. Her old friend Kate Horn explains.
We would have been in our early 20s at the time. Melissa met a fellow, I think, on Friday night drinks, sort of after work in the city. I think it was rather intense pretty quickly. She was very keen on him. But it turns out that he really was using her credit card. Things were going missing from the parents' home from their safe, etc. They started to get a little bit suspicious and they hired a private investigator, and apparently this fellow was going from state to state doing this sort of thing, preying on women that he thought that he could do that sort of thing with.
Her parents tried to break it to her gently that her boyfriend was a liar and a cheat who didn't really have any interest in Melissa, just her money. Reportedly, she was devastated, not at their revelations, but instead that they'd hired someone to dig up dirt on the love of her life.
According to Kate, Melissa refused to believe what she'd been told by her parents and ran off with this man. Melissa's brother Adam tried to enlist Kate to talk some sense into his sister.
He had rung to ask if I could perhaps speak some sense into Melissa and ask if she would come back. I didn't intervene. It was pre-mobile phone days for starters. I kind of thought that she needed to work it out for herself.
Not long after Melissa returned home, the fraudster had maxed out her credit cards, and when he'd finished ripping her off, he dumped her.
Melissa's friends said that she was just distraught and may have suffered some kind of breakdown after all of this. Another friend, Jody, recalled how upset Melissa was at the time, but that the Grimley family were trying to keep it quiet.
I knew that there were certain things that were going on, but it was all kept very hush-hush, and it was only like years later when, you're talking in different groups and stuff that bits and pieces came out. It made her distance herself from her family for a bit, but yeah, that's about as much as I knew about it.
Jody said she thought that this incident might have had a long-lasting effect on Melissa.
The boyfriend, the con job, that I think may have switched something in her mind, rorted her somewhat, and her personality did change around then.
if Melissa learned a valuable lesson from being cheated on, being the victim of a con artist, it wasn't the one her friends and family had imagined.
It's worth noting that not long after she was the broken-hearted victim of the romance scammer, Melissa picked herself up, dusted herself off, and embarked on her own life of crime, forging her boss's signature on cheques just as a starter.
But that was only the first small step in what would escalate so much as the years passed. In her very next job, Melissa's skullduggery required nothing more than a small bottle of corrective fluid.
I just cannot believe this. So after being fired over the forged cheques, Melissa threw herself into losing weight and getting fit. Her personal trainer introduced her to another of his clients, a well-regarded financial advisor who was looking to train someone up as an office manager at Wise Financial Services.
Her boss, who doesn't want to be identified, recalled Melissa being what he described as bubbly and super efficient. After a couple of years, she did the requisite training to move into financial planning. And then in 2002, she borrowed $750,000 to buy a 25% stake in the business, which was majority owned by global banking giant ING.
According to her boss, she did brilliant work and the clients loved her, which wasn't entirely true, either about the brilliant work or about the client approval.
Yeah, because in 2020, when financial advisor Hilton Wolfe heard the news about Melissa Caddick's disappearance, that name, for him, something rang a bell.
I had the experience many years ago of meeting up with her through colleagues in the industry, whereby she was highly recommended as a financial planner and even being the financial planner of the year within her organisation, which was ING at the time. She came to help me do an investment for a client that wasn't linked to insurances. It was a pure investment. This lady arrived dressed to the 9s, 10s and 11s, high heels, an outfit that was really fitting for the purpose, and everything about her was just classy. Very confident, and said, "We're going to make money together." And I just laughed and said to myself, well, I hope we make a lot of money for the client. She definitely knew everything. She knew everything, had done it before, and she said she's made a lot of money for her clients.
But she didn't impress Hilton.
Because people who are good don't have to come across like that. The good people who make a lot of money are the quiet achievers who show you the way and you say, why didn't I think of that? And they teach you something along the way. She didn't teach me anything. I thought to myself, how bad can it be? It's an investment. We both know what we want. We know what the client wants. And let's just do it. And I will monitor it and make sure that it runs smoothly.
So this is where things get interesting. A client wanted to invest $104,000 through his family's super fund. Hilton Wolfe said that the investment via Melissa should have generated a lot of income through dividends and interest, as well as capital growth.
Hilton said you could pay several $1,000s upfront, which was a fee for service, for all the work Melissa did, or you could pay a one-off commission. His client chose to pay the upfront fee, which was $3,400, rather than the commission.
So when the application form was completed, he handed over 2 cheques to Melissa, one being the fee for service and the other one the amount that was going to be invested with MLC.
So after a year or two, the client asked Hilton to take over his investment, and it was then that he discovered something here was wrong. The growth on his client's investment should have been much, much higher than what he saw.
Hilton contacted MLC and asked for his client's original application form. It arrived a few days later in the post. Still nothing jumped out at him. It wasn't until a few weeks later that Hilton stumbled across Melissa's scam.
I had to run into the office on a weekend, and I must have turned some papers upside down when I left on the Friday afternoon. And as I switched the lights on in my office and sat at my desk, the back page of the application form was looking at me. And I just said, that's it. I realised what the problem was.
Yeah, so this is unbelievable. Melissa had doctored the document.
There were Tipex markings on the back page where commissions had been changed without our notification or signatures or initials or anything.
Melissa had used what used to be known as Tipp-X, or when I was in school it was called whiteout, that sort of correction fluid you use to fix up a mistake on a document.
Where it said 0 commission, Melissa had altered that to give herself the upfront commission as well.
Unfortunately, Melissa Caddick, she earned a double whammy. She earned a fee up front and she took money out of the investment up front as well, which she shouldn't have done.
She doubled what she was entitled to. So instead of getting the $3,400, she got at least twice that amount, which meant the client invested less because she'd already stolen a chunk of the principal. And Hilton Wolff is adamant that this was a rort.
Rip-off. That's the word to use. I contacted her boss and he said to me it must have been an error. And I contacted Melissa and she said to me, oh, golly me, my secretary messed up here and apologies all the way around.
Hilton Wolff said that Melissa didn't seem flustered or taken aback at all that she'd been caught out. Instead, she kept blaming the mistake on her secretary. But he maintains it's just impossible for Melissa not to have known that she was getting double the amount she was entitled to.
So what happened when Hilton Wolff reported her to her bosses?
To Melissa, absolutely nothing. No one went to the authorities about this.
So, Tom, the key thing here, once again, is that she's caught red-handed stealing money. I mean, this is embezzlement. And there were absolutely no repercussions.
Nope, nothing. They just took Melissa's word for it that, oh yeah, this was a secretarial slip-up with the whiteout. But, I mean, Hilton, he's certain this was not a one-off.
I don't want to think of how many other application forms were submitted and were not picked up, because this is not the only one. I know. As the sun's going to rise in the east tomorrow, this could not have been the only application form that this was done to.
Now, if anyone wants to check them out, we've put the documents and a detailed explanation of the fraud up on our website.
If she was doing this to Hilton's client, sure as eggs she was doing it to other clients. So, Tom, if Hilton Wolff's hypothesis is correct, Melissa Caddick's deft hand with the Tipp-X might explain her friend's constant speculation in those early days as to exactly where the money was coming from. How did she afford that first house in Paddington? But if only they knew that Melissa was fired from one job for committing a serious fraud and then sprung falsifying documents at her very next job.
I'll say it again, Kate. From little things, big things grow.
Oh, please sing, Tom.
I won't subject the listeners to that. But look, I mean, it does leave you asking that question. How many other scams was Melissa running in those early days that no one was picking up on? Or, again, some did notice and then just remained silent about. I mean, you can bet your bottom dollar that she was up to no good on multiple fronts. And you've got to keep in mind here, when she was wielding the whiteout, she'd only just hit 30 years of age. I mean, she still had another 2 decades to come of working her apparent magic with the numbers, Kate.
Oh, those veggie mass, it'll do it for you every time. Melissa Caddick's lying and cheating to get what she wanted was not confined to her working life. And in the next episode, we'll look at the havoc she wreaked in her personal life and how she ruthlessly went about destroying her first husband when he got in her way.
She said he turned out to be someone, who's really nasty to me.
He wasn't working when he was over there, and it was quite a volatile relationship.
The first husband was abusive, threatening.
He was controlling. He told me all these lies.
They didn't paint a very nice picture of him.
She tried to poison everyone's minds against Tony.
If you have found any of the content of today's episode troubling, please contact Lifeline on 13 11 14.
Liar Liar is a co-production of the Sydney Morning Herald and 60 Minutes.
It was written and presented by Kate McClymont and Tom Steinfort.
Michael Evans is the Sydney Morning Herald's investigations editor and the series' supervising producer.
This episode was produced and edited by David McMillan with Tracy Hannaford for 60 Minutes.
Kirsty Thompson is the executive producer of 60 Minutes.
For more of Australia's best investigative journalism, subscribe to the Sydney Morning Herald by visiting smh.com.au and watch 60 Minutes on 9 or 9 Now every Sunday.
If you know more about Melissa Caddick's disappearance, please contact the team by emailing liarliarpodcast@smh.com.au.
Some names and voices have been changed in this series to protect the identity of victims.